Hi everyone, and welcome to our Genesis Bible study. So last week we covered um, Abraham living by faith. So we see he lived a life of an altar and a tent, right? And the altar is to satisfy God's need. So that's where he offers sacrifice to God, and then the tent is his need for a dwelling place. We also saw that these ones, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they were tent dwellers. They lived in tent, and they eagerly awaited the city which had the foundation, whose architect and builder is God. So this city, the New Jerusalem, was their goal and aim. So they lived with that in view. So just a recap again. So in Abraham, we see the life of a believer. See, first he was called by God, and he lived by faith. So today, we had come to the trial of the called. So as believers, we are called by God, we live by faith, but we all have trials, right? So trials, although it's not pleasant, it's something that's needed for us to even go on in the Lord and to gain experience in the Lord, right? So in this particular lesson, in Genesis 12:9 to Genesis 13:18, this portion of scripture, we see that Abraham had two main trials, right? And when you read these verses, you would see that there was a famine in the land. So right after God promised him all these different things, he'd make his name great, his seed will be like the sands of the seashore, in him all the nations will be blessed. Then he had a famine. A famine came in. So some kind of hardship, right? And this trial was for Abraham to learn to trust in God. But what happened? So when you read in Genesis 12, you see that Abraham went down to Egypt. So Egypt in the Bible always typifies the world, right? So Abraham left the place Bethel, which is the house of God, and he went to Egypt, went to the world. So as a believer, sometimes there's hardship, right? But we should remain in the place that God has put us, right? But Abraham didn't do that. Actually, for his entire time going to Egypt, when he was in Egypt, he never called on the name of the Lord. He never built an altar, right? So while in Egypt, what happened? He lied. So he was so fallen. So he told his wife, let's lie and say we're siblings because I'm afraid that the Egyptians will kill me and take you as their wife. So they did that. But even while in Egypt, God had mercy on Abraham and Sarah, and he caused great plagues to come on Pharaoh's house, right? And eventually Pharaoh realized that, hey, this is Abraham's wife, right? Actually, God told Pharaoh, don't touch this woman. So what does that mean in our experience, right? Just like if you know the story of Jonah, he ran away from the Lord, and he was in the boat, and everyone in the boat was experiencing God's judgment because of this one. So as ones who are called, when we leave our position, just as in the beginning of chapter 12, all the nations are blessed in Abraham, but in this time, because of what happened, Pharaoh was cursed because of Abraham. So as ones who are called, those around us can experience blessing or curse depending on our stance with the Lord. So eventually, after this, Pharaoh gave Sarai back to Abraham, and Abraham left, and actually Pharaoh gave him a lot of riches, right? So Abraham went back to Bethel, to the place where he pitched his tent between Bethel and right? And he built an altar, and he called on the name of the Lord. So he went back to his position in the Lord. So as believers, we have different trials. And even right now, we have a trial. And this trial is for us to really put into practice what the Lord has already promised us, right? Um, so He promised that He would be faithful to us. So we need to now, even with all the uncertainty around us, we need to be those who trust in the Lord, right? Not go down to Egypt like Abraham, not lie like Abraham, but trust in the Lord. And right after this happened, so now Abraham and his nephew Lot, they had all these possessions, right? So Lot's herdsmen and Abraham's herdsmen, they started to fight, contend with each other, right? And Abraham, learning from the lesson that God takes care of his chosen people, even when they're in a fallen condition, he didn't take any, he didn't make any choice, right? So he allowed Lot to choose. He told Lot, "You choose wherever." And Lot looked up, and Lot saw the best portion of the land close to Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot took that portion of land. And Abraham, after Lot left him, and then Jehovah appeared to him. So this is another point, right? Because he learned a lesson of trusting in the Lord. So he didn't even strive with Lot. He could have fight with Lot over the land, but he didn't. He didn't strive, and Jehovah appeared to him this time and reinforced the promise. And actually, Jehovah told him, "Abraham, look up, look to the east, to the west. Everything that your eyes see, this would be yours," right? And then he moved on with the Lord to a place where he would be now for the rest of his life. So he journeyed onward with the Lord. And in the upcoming lesson, we'd see that Lot, because he had his own choice, Abram would have to fight for him to bring him back. So as believers, we need to accept that everything is under God's sovereign hand, and that's the lesson, right? So one, we need to trust in the Lord, and we need to trust in His sovereignty, right? You can't run away from God. You can't run away from His sovereignty. Actually, if you try to run away from God to go somewhere else, you'd realize that that's exactly the place the Lord wanted to be, and He would be right there to exercise His sovereignty. So Abraham, through his failure, he learned the lesson of God's sovereignty, right? So in this situation today, you see so many things going on, right? And you're wondering, like, Lord, where are you? We need to trust in the Lord, right? He probably wants to move us from one place to another, right? To a higher experience of Him. So instead of doing like Abraham and going to Egypt, looking for answers in the world, we need to trust in the Lord's word, stand upon His word, and then He would usher us into a newer, higher, and deeper experience of Him, right? And eventually we'd be like Jacob, right? So when we come to Jacob, Jacob was one who, yes, the Lord promised him something, and Jacob tried a lot of things. He had a lot of tricks, a lot of, he deceived a lot of people. But at the end of Jacob's life, Jacob said, "Surely you have been the one shepherding me all my life until now." So Jacob realized, coming to the end of his life, after all his schemes, that even through his schemes, God was there shepherding him. So as believers, as ones who are called, ones who live by faith, we would experience trials, right? Trials are not uncommon to a believer, but we need to rise above that trials by trusting in the Lord. And only when we trust in the Lord can we experience Him in a deeper way, right? So when Abraham was in a fallen condition in Egypt, he couldn't call on the Lord. So that's a helpful tip for us believers. If you're in a situation, see if you could call on the Lord. See if you can pray to the Lord. If you can't pray to the Lord, then you know that situation is not ideal, right? So you know that, Lord, I need to go back to my standing. I need to stand on the right position. And when you do that, then the Lord will come in and minister to you, even reinforce what He has promised you. So this is the introduction to this week's Bible study, and down in the description below you'd find a reading. So read the verses. The verses are really good. I didn't have time to go through all the verses, but these verses, Ephesians 1:4, Romans 8:28-29, Matthew 10:29 and 31, shows God's sovereignty. In Matthew 10, he takes care of the birds, so much more He takes care of us. In Romans 8, we see those whom He foreknew, He predestinated to be conformed to the Son of God. And actually it says all things work together for good to those who love God and those who are called according to His purpose. All things, right? So even Abraham leaving his position and going down to Egypt, when he returned with a lot of possessions, right? So the Lord is taking care of us, brothers and sisters, and we need to believe and trust in Him. So thank you, and hope to see you in the discussions on Zoom. Goodbye. God bless you.